Okay, we're going to do video 9 here. This one is about your research methods development interaction for week 3. So this will help give you a little bit more information about doing that. And first, we're going to review a few things, reviewing what is science. So science is the results that you get when you use the scientific method. It is not whatever seems to be published in a journal article. It may or may not be science. Just because it's published in a journal article or a scientific journal doesn't mean that it's necessarily science, because they may not have used the scientific method or they may not have used it very well. Science is not whatever a scientist says. It is not a religion. Instead, it is a way, it's a method, it's a way of looking at data, a method of handling and identifying and coming up with data. So the idea in terms of science is that you want to be objective. And this is the challenge, because being 100% objective is pretty much 100% impossible. We grow up in a culture, we grow up in sort of this conceptual structure that it's hard to think outside the box in those terms. And so it's hard to be objective. Well, let's review now 3 basic types of studies that you've learned about. Frequency study. These should be very familiar to you now. In a frequency study, basically you're finding out about something. In an association study, that's where you're looking at more than one variable. You're trying to find a connection between 2 things. And in a causal study, you're trying to see if one thing makes another thing happen. There are also 2 different basic types of articles beyond studies. So you're going to have research articles that report on studies. Then you're going to have 2 other basic types. There's more than this, but these are the 2 that I want to alert you to that are pretty common. One of them is review. And a review includes all kinds of information that's been put out there in the past. And so we're going to just review what's out there for you. And a meta-analysis is an article that combines the results of lots of different studies. So you can get a sense of what all the studies together are saying, but it does this in a mathematical way. Questions come up from the knowledge that you already have. It's hard to come up with questions based on knowledge you don't have, right? That seems to make sense. So a lot of times, if you want to know about questions, just start reading some articles. Then you want to create a hypothesis for your proposal. And that hypothesis can either be based on data that came out of a study you read, so that's a data-driven hypothesis, or on theory. Let's say you understand how people say something happens, there are theoretical ideas about it, and you have a question. So then you have a hypothesis that came out of a theory or a theory-driven hypothesis. All right, so for your research proposal, there's going to be a number of parts. You're going to write an introduction, and I'll teach you how to do this. That introduction will include your study hypothesis. And then you'll write a method section. The method section has these 4 parts in it: participants, procedures, measures, and statistical plan. You may notice that there are some articles that have more or less in their method section, and that's fine. This is it's pretty much standard that these are the 4 things, but it isn't required. And then the discussion, since you won't have results, you're not going to run the study, so you won't have results. Instead of discussing what the results are, we're going to skip right to the place where you discuss internal and external validity of your study, and we'll talk about what that means later. So we'll put all of this together for the most part through your development interactions, so that it won't be like a really extra. So for this week, here's what you need to do. You've identified an idea and study design. So you have some sort of, it's either a frequency, association, or causal study design, and you have an idea. So for example, let's say your idea was, I want to think about agoraphobia. I like agoraphobia. And I want to look at how agoraphobia is connected to something else. And then you've identified a measure, how you're going to operationalize your construct. So if your construct is agoraphobia, it's operationalized with a questionnaire And for this example, I picked the agoraphobic cognitions questionnaire. And so you've picked out, or you will pick out, your final selection here for which measure you want to use, and that is how you operationalized your construct. And then you figure out who you want to study, who's going to be in your study, your participants. So you want to be specific about these. So for example, women aged 30 to 45 who live in Lexington, Virginia, those are the people who are in your study, or at least who are your sample. And so the development assignment asks you to do three things. First, you want to finalize your study design and idea. And you want to do this you want to write it up in a formal way. So it looks like this. The study is an association design examining the correlation between drinking caffeine and weekly amounts of social anxiety, or social anxiety as measured each week. Participants will report how many caffeinated drinks they had by ounces and brand. Social anxiety will be measured using a questionnaire that's administered at the midpoint of each week. And so that is a great write-up of your idea and your design. Okay, the next thing you have to do is write out your measures section. In order to write out the measures, it's probably best to go just take a look at a few articles. Get online, look at some articles, see how they do it. Get familiar with how they write up measures sections, and then do the same thing. So what you want to do is list each measure that you're going to use. And here you want to include demographic information, because everyone will list basic demographic information. And so in addition to the specific measures that you're going to use, you're going to want to list basic demographic information that will be included, or that will be collected, will include age, gender, and whatever other aspects that you think are important. And so you'll be writing basic demographic information that will be collected, will include, and then write out what it is that you're collecting. And it's going to be minimum of at least age and gender, probably educational information, probably income information, etc. You're going to add information about reliability and validity for each measure later. We'll talk about what those are in the future. But for now, write out the description of each questionnaire that you're using. If you're only using one, that's fine. If you're using more than one, then you need to list each one and write out the description. And you can see the example here. And then finally, you're going to write out the description of the participants. Here, you want to make sure you've got plenty of detail so that the person who's reading this knows exactly who it is that you're studying, so that if they want to replicate it or understand it better, they know exactly what you're talking about. So if you're saying women, I don't really know what that means other than that they're women. Is it young women, old women, all kinds of women, women who live in the mountains, women who love to shop? I don't know. Tell me about the women. So include all those details. So the example here is participants included 45. So you're gonna exactly tell them how many people. So if it's 500, then tell them you're including 500 people. If it's 45, great, put 45, whatever the number is that you're including. We'll talk later about how to figure out how many you actually need. For now, it makes sense to just say 50. So say your participants included 50 and just use that number. Participants included 45 male and female students at Southern Virginia University, ages 17 to 29, who were, and then here are some more identifying information so that you know exactly who's in your study. Okay, so summing up what we just talked about, we reviewed what is science, what is the type of study you're using, frequency, association, or causal, and then we talked about how to do this week's development interaction. See you in the next video.